Neri.
Yes, ma'am.
Are you going to be able to come to office hours at 1 o'clock, or do you want to talk to me at a different time?
Oh, sorry, my mic did not work. I'm sorry. I said that I would like to come at 2 if that works today because I have another meeting at 1.
At what time, sorry?
Is that okay if I will come at 2?
Yes, I've got someone else coming in between 2 and 3, but if you get there first, we'll talk before Akeem joins, because he's got an interview thing. Okay.
Okay, I do have a meeting at 1, so once I will be done there, I will call you.
Okay. Alrighty. Perfect. Where is everybody today? Okay. All right, well, we will get started. So today there are 2 labs on the syllabus, one of which you won't be able to do at home. So we'll talk about that one first, and then it relates to the new chapter that we're starting tomorrow. And that's on blood pressure. Okay, so without a blood pressure monitor, can't do this one. So a couple of things to pay attention to though when you are measuring blood pressure. It's highly sensitive to any movement or any changes in emotion. All right, so blood pressure can go up and down very easily, so it's difficult to get a really true, accurate picture once you've got out of bed in the morning. Okay, so if you take blood pressure, you have to be sitting or lying down for 5 to 10 minutes ahead of time. If you were here on campus, we would sit down on the floor and have the lights dimmed and have you just quiet and still for a few minutes before we take the blood pressure. So that's important to know, because if you've rushed in because you're late, your blood pressure reading is not going to be accurate, right? It's going to be high. Any kind of movement increases elements of blood pressure. Resistance movement increases blood pressure hugely. So, think about what someone looks like when they lift a really heavy weight, right? They go red in the face, or their blood vessels bulge in their neck and in their arms, right? Because of the increase in pressure. So we have to be very careful when we are prescribing exercise programs to think about does this person have high blood pressure, right? If this person has high blood pressure, how high is it, right? Which category are they in? Certain categories we don't want to do any resistance work at all for a while. If it's one of the lower categories, then you can do a little bit of light resistance, so maybe body weight after a couple of weeks of getting them moving. So you've got to be really on the ball and paying attention to the person's health status when we're looking at blood pressure. Okay, and I think I'm pretty sure that the categories have changed slightly, the numbers have changed, and I'll make sure in class to double check that. But we have 4 categories now. There's a normal, which is less than 120 over less than 80. And then they added relatively recently a pre-hypertension category. And the idea behind that is trying to catch people before they're clinically hypertensive, but they're heading in the wrong direction, right? Because if we intervene, we can reduce their blood pressure and get it back into the normal range, right? They've got to be willing to change their diet a little bit. They've got to be willing to add some physical activity to their lifestyle, right? But if you have someone who's willing to do the work that's necessary, and we get them in that pre-hypertensive stage, then we can get them back into a normal category. So I think that's why they've introduced that new category, is to try to catch people early enough that we can intervene without medication. Right? Then we have a stage 1 hypertension, and then if you're in stage 2 of hypertension, you're really in trouble, right? So that's pretty bad. Now, interestingly, you can be high on either the systolic or the diastolic number. So the systolic number is the bigger number of the two, and it represents the blood pressure when the heart is contracting. Okay? The diastolic is the lower number, and it represents the pressure when the heart is relaxing. All right? So, and we'll talk more about that in the chapter. All right, so we've got contraction, relaxation, so these blood pressures are changing all the time. You only have to be high on one of them consistently to be in the category. All right, both numbers don't have to meet the cutoff. Okay. On the other hand, no one is going to tell you you're hypertensive on one measure, right? So normally what would happen is, you know, if you go to the clinic or to the doctor and your blood pressure is high, they're going to ask you questions like, have you just exercised, or have you had a row with your partner, or something like that, that would raise your blood pressure. And if they don't get an answer that explains what they're looking at, they'll say, well, come back in a few weeks and let's measure it again. And they're going to do that several times before they define hypertension, right? Because it's so variable, because it's so, not delicate, that's not the right, so responsive, okay? They have to make sure that the picture is a chronic, ongoing picture, not just an acute one-off scenario, right? One thing, stress increases blood pressure, so people who have very stressful jobs can be hypertensive, and so you need to take that into account as well if you are creating exercise programs for these individuals, all right? So just be careful to read this thoroughly, this lab, number 3, all right? And it teaches you where to place the cuff properly, because if the cuff isn't on the arm in the correct position, then the numbers are all screwed up, right? The cuff has to be over the inside of the elbow there. Some of the newer cuffs now have an arrow to line up that makes it easier to put the cuff on. When you take it using an electronic blood pressure monitor, it really gives you a lot of respect for clinicians and nurses and nurse practitioners who can just use a stethoscope and pick up your blood pressure just by listening. It's really hard to do it that way. You have to listen for the little pop, and then if there's noise going on in the room, it can be very difficult. So you really kind of learn to appreciate the skill that they have in taking blood pressure manually, okay? Okay, so as I said, please make sure that you read that one thoroughly. You can't do that one, but that information plays into the next chapter that we're going to cover. Okay? All right, and then the other one that's on the syllabus today is a step test. All right. And the one in the workbook is the Queen's College step test. Up on Blackboard for you, I have a different version, which is the YMCA step test, which would be the one we would use if you were here. And the reason for that is that the step height on the YMCA assessment test is exactly the same as the step height in the arena. And so we can go in the arena and do the step test. For the Queen's College, you'll see that they want a bleacher that's 16¼ inches high, or a step, and we don't have anything that's that high. So that's why we use the other one, not the one in the book, okay? Step test is a really interesting assessment, because it uses your heart rate recovery to look at how fit you are cardiovascularly, all right? So back at the beginning of the semester when we took heart rates, we mentioned the fact that there were different ways of taking heart rate depending on what it is you're trying to identify, okay? So if I want a resting heart rate, again, I need to have been sitting still for quite some time for it to be accurate, right? The best time to take your resting heart rate is lying in bed in the morning before you sit up, okay? That's the closest to accurate that you're going to get during the day. And then the best way to take it is to count a whole minute, although often for speed of the tests and the assessments, they'll get you to take it for 30 seconds and times it by 2, right? That's okay, but heart rate variability is such that the beat to beat is quite different. And so taking 30 and multiplying it by 2 would not necessarily give you the same exact number as taking it for the whole minute. But you don't really want to take 10 seconds and multiply it by 6 if what you want is a resting heart rate. That would be quite inaccurate, all right? Now, if you want to know your heart rate at that very moment, right, because you don't have a heart rate monitor, then taking it for 10 and multiplying it by 6 gives you a figure that you want, right? Because it's going to tell you what your heart rate is doing in that 10 seconds. You want it as close to the exercise as possible to find out what your heart rate is right that minute, right? Now, recovery heart rate is closely linked to cardiovascular fitness. So what we do with a recovery heart rate is we do the exercise and then we sit down and we take the heart rate for a whole minute. Okay? And what we find is that the fitter we are, the quicker our heart rate, recovery heart rate, drops down back towards my resting heart rate. The less fit I am, the longer it takes for my heart rate to drop down. So it's a very easy, cheap way of testing whether or not your cardiovascular fitness is improving, right? All I need is a metronome and a stopwatch. So we've all got a stopwatch on our phones now. You can even get a metronome tick-tock noise online, or it doesn't cost much to buy a metronome, okay? So it's a very easy, cheap, quick way of assessing cardiovascular fitness. Does that make sense? Now, it's not a very popular assessment because it's quite hard physically, okay? Step test is 3 minutes, so you're stepping up and down for 3 minutes, and you keep going. So, think about that time, 3 minutes. What does that tell you about energy systems? What's happening around 2.5 and 3 minutes? Which system am I transitioning out of, and which one am I transitioning to? Around 2.5.
You're going from anaerobic to aerobic, right?
Yes, good. Right, and so that's what makes this a really hard test physically, right? Because 3 minutes is right at the end, if not slightly outside your anaerobic timeline. Right, because glycolysis is going to be predominant up to 2.5 to 3 minutes, right? And then you're going to switch around that time, you're going to be switching over and shuttling off the pyruvate to the mitochondria and starting to work aerobically. But at 3 minutes, you're right on the borderline, right? So you haven't got quite enough oxygen in yet to make the full switch to aerobic metabolism, but you are running out of steam on an anaerobic situation because you're building up hydrogen ions and the system is fatiguing. Okay? So it can be quite hard work, particularly for people who are less fit. Okay? Technically, you have to keep up with the metronome in order to complete the test. So, if you have someone who's very unfit, very sedentary, possibly overweight, and they fall behind on the step or they stop to get, that's the end of the test. That means they're not fit enough to complete the test, right? And they get a 0, okay? So, in that case, you would have to do some aerobic training with that individual to get them fit enough to be able to complete the respiratory cardiovascular test. Okay? So it's quite hard, even if you're in good shape, because of that transition point that you're at, right? But that As soon as you've finished your 3 minutes, sit down, find your pulse, count your pulse for 60 seconds, and that recovery heart rate should get quicker as you get more fit. All right? So what I want you to do is a step test. You may or may not have a step the right height for either of the assessments that I've given you. All right? If you happen to have a step somewhere that is the right height, that's great. You can do the test for real. You can compare your numbers to the tables in the workbook, right? If you have a step that is the wrong height, I want you to do it anyway, but then just make a note that this wasn't an accurate picture because you didn't have the right equipment. Okay? And I want you to film yourself for a minute. Or don't film the whole 3 minutes because you won't be able to download it. It will take 4 weeks to download that little piece of film into Blackboard. So just take like a minute snapshot of you doing the step test and load that video and load the worksheet. Does that make sense? So here's the other worksheet. Let me show you. I'll hold it up. Where is it?
So the worksheet you want us to submit will be the one that you uploaded on Blackboard, right? Not the textbook one?
Probably, because finding a 16.25-inch step would be unlikely. You're more likely to find something. Oh, there it is. That's why I couldn't find it. You're more likely to find something closer to the YMCA test. So here's the YMCA. You only need a 12-inch step to do the YMCA one. Okay. I think the metronome is the same for both, so should be able to find a metronome 96 beat. If you Google that, I'm pretty sure we did that last semester. What else to tell you about a step test? Let me think. You can change legs, right? So if you always lead with your right leg, so you go up, up, down, down, up, up, down, down. If you want to, you can change and go left leg, right? So you don't have to do the entire 3 minutes leading with the same leg. So you can give your legs a bit of a rest in there. But you can't stop. And you have to keep up with the metronome. Okay? And this YMCA is under, I hate it when it does that. If you go to go to participation, and underneath the list of folders, there's a document, YMCA 3-minute step test. Okay? And then in the week 7 folder, I'll put a assignment tab so you can load your worksheet and your little video clip. Right? And as with all the labs, right, the key is, remember, the reason we do a lab session is to give you something real to link back to information in the classroom. so that it's not just this abstract information, you can see how it really applies. Right? So when you're reading through the backgrounds and you're looking at the worksheets, make sure that you're thinking about how does this align with information from class. Okay, because that's why we're doing it. Any questions?
Not today.
Okay. Now tomorrow, we'll be starting the next chapter. So keep an eye out for that announcement of your quiz if you haven't already done it. Okay? And I think that's all I have for you. Unless anyone has any questions.